Yes, I am off to Melbourne, where it is a lot warmer than in Tokyo. Oh, don't know why I suddenly wanted to sneeze. I haven't sneezed all day. Just as I start the live stream, so I don't have a lot of topics tonight, and actually I don't plan to have this go on for a long time, unless of course you've got topics. Remember, as always, if you do have topics for me, just add Mark Hickelsyme in there in the comments, and it will pop up in orange to me. But yes, hey James Kelly, good to see you. Good evening. Sorry I'm a little bit late, but that's the way it goes. I am, yes, just been pottering around. I've been packing, heading away on Thursday to Melbourne. Looking forward to that. The J-Vlog salutations. Thanks for joining me for the last show of the year. It's not really a look back. I might have some more time to put that together while I'm on vacation. Hey, Tech Art 2, good to see you. Tokyo 503, indeed, Merry Christmas. Or whatever appropriate season greeting you have. Good to indeed enjoy that. I'll be of course working on Christmas. Japan, you don't get a day off. I will be taking vacation time off from the 26th, but that will be leaving people back at work to to cover. So of course in Japan it's just calendar New Year's. I'm looking forward to a break. I will be in Australia, so I will not be having KFC. I'll be having probably some, I'll be having a delayed, probably a bit of hopefully a roast lamb at some point, but that's about it really. But yes, no, I'm glad to hear that it looks like, in spite of the fact that Sydney was 47 degrees today, like some crazy temperature. And Penrith, it sounds like the other day, Melbourne was crazy. It was like 43 one day and 22 the next day, which is how I remember it as a kid. But I haven't been there since 1990, and I haven't lived there since 1984. So I'm quite looking forward to going back to Melbourne, it should be a lot of fun. So with that, final topics for end of year. 1 minute, I just have to take a quick moment here. Let me. Oh, sorry about that. So yes, Adelaide is getting smashed by the heat. I saw that Nullarbor was like 49 point something. This is crazy. Anyway, it's always hot in Australia. You expect it, especially at least in Brisbane, where my mum lives now. Whenever I go down there, it's always kind of even, because of the tropical sort of heat. But down in Melbourne or South Australia, it just goes. It's just desert. It's either, it's either 40 something degrees or 20 something degrees. But yes. So a few topics to talk about, and then I am heading away for the end of the year. So yes, The Expanse season 4, the J-Vlog. No spoilers. I was actually just about to watch it, except that I realised I had to prepare for the show. So I'm not going to. So please, no spoilers on that. In fact, I just realised at the start, I was about to start watching it, and I realised that it's been so long since season 3. That I kind of needed to refresh myself when it's had the intro like previously on The Expanse, like for episode 1 of season 4, and I realised I didn't remember any of it. It's been like 2 years, and I remember that I really liked it and I was excited about season 4, but I just realised I needed to catch up again. So I'm actually tempted to rewatch seasons 1 through 3 as well to get back up to speed. I don't know if that's really worthwhile, but yes, I am looking forward to watching The Expanse again. So yes, that's probably something I'll do on the flight over to Australia. I did finish watching up to season 5. In Japan, you don't have season 6 yet, but I watched up to season 5 of Silicon Valley, which I quite enjoyed. It's quite close to home with private life or with work stuff, so it was I actually found that quite fun to watch. Although it's one of those things that at the same time, when you're kind of trapped in binge watching something, you're kind of glad that it's over. It doesn't feel healthy to be trapped in watching it, but I am open to suggestions. I've got the Expanse up next. If there's anything good that you guys are watching, particularly that's available on Amazon or on Netflix, I am all ears as to what's something good to download to watch during vacation, so let me know. But I'll get into the topics for tonight and let me know if you've got anything. Bob Berlin's boy, working Christmas, good on you. In the great Japanese tradition. pardon me. So yes, first topic that we've got is that Japan, the world rankings came out for participation of women or equality in society, and Japan dropped 11 points from 110 to 121 in spite of womenomics and various other initiatives by the Japanese government. They don't seem to be doing the right thing at the moment. Levels of equality of participation and access to the workforce are just not well set up in Japan, and this is for a country which is having shortages of workers everywhere and is having a bit of an economic crisis of not being able to find enough people to take the jobs that are there. It is weird that yes, at the same time the position of women in the economy is worsening. Well, it could be a signal that the economy overall is worsening, but yeah, there is this other general problem that given that child rearing and reproduction is still largely left to the responsibility of women in Japanese society, and the fact that you have the situation that you would think that where there are fewer children and more elderly people, that the society would be putting a priority on supporting people having children, and making it easier and providing more infrastructure. But in fact the opposite is happening. Actually, old people are now frequently complaining when childcare facilities are established in neighborhoods where they live. They complain about the noise and they lobby to get them shut down. So it's actually getting harder and harder to it's becoming a really anti-young people society, and it's getting harder and harder to have children, not more convenient. So yeah, the J-Vlog, good topic actually. Hey Razel, good to see you. This is the way I have spoken. Good to see you, Raz. And the J-Vlog, good topic on the USA Space Force. In fact, actually one which I'd quite like to talk about. So I'll zip through the news. There's not a lot to talk about tonight. So if you've got more topics like the J-Vlog, I'd be happy to talk about that. Actually, that'd be kind of cool. Sort of news. There's another one. They seem to like these little surveys that people have. This one I'm pretty sure would have been a. What was the scope of the survey? I mean, on the one hand, as someone who technically practices as a lawyer, which is normally a pretty boring or disliked profession, it's kind of nice to see that so many Japanese women, when they're thinking of professions or people with a trade that they would like to marry, architect is number one. I know architects, not a lot of architects, but I know architects. It's a profession that I respect, but it's a kind of under-respected and underpaid. And these are people, by the way, who have trades, or basically professionals. One was architect, 2 was lawyer, 3 was a tax accountant, and 4 was public certified accountant. I don't know why a tax accountant would be more desirable as someone to marry than a CPA, but there you go. So I was thinking, yeah, lawyers are doing awesome in whatever small survey that this was. However, at the same time, people that they don't want to marry a lawyer was 50%. So mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys. That's been, I guess, proven in Japan as well. The assumption is that they are always working and they wouldn't be around, but there again, I'm pretty sure that's also the same with architects. So there you go. Te Waiwai, I've actually got that in the topics. Shrinking heights of Japanese. I just read that like a couple of hours ago, so I'll be very, very happy to share that. And welcome to the show, last show of the year. Mr. Quaddy Chip, tax accountant. I think why is lawyer number 2? Yeah, I know. I mean, why did we lose to accountants? It doesn't make any sense. Or why did we lose to architects? I think more the focus was on why architects were desirable, is that make a lot of money. Yeah, basically the assumption is that they'd have money. I think the thing about lawyers that came up was that coming in second was with lawyer. Earning power was a big factor, with 70% of respondents saying that they imagine lawyers to be the wealthiest out of all job types. Not true. Investment bankers do way better than lawyers. The one respondent, apparently envisioning some sort of legal issues in the future, said he'd be able to take care of us when we got into legal trouble. I do remember when I got into the bar, I went to a friend's wedding for my Japanese surfer friends, and everybody was coming up to me after the wedding and saying, if anything ever happens to me, please help me out. And I knew some of the people who were saying that, and I knew that they were serious. So yeah, I can kind of understand that part. Sorry, 1 minute, I'm just going to duck out a second. I realize that when I bend over out of shot and I come up and my nose is red and my eyes are red and I'm wiping my nose, it looks like I've been doing probably lines of something. I haven't. I've been blowing my nose and I don't. It's weird. This happens with the show. I think when I start talking in the evening, especially maybe after I've just had the air conditioning, the heater on, maybe it's the dust or something. I always get a little bit sneezy when the show starts, so I'm sorry about that. But I assure you, I'm not snorting baking soda or anything like that here. I realize how it looks. Believe me, the show would be a lot more interesting if I was if I was doing something like that. So there, to Waiwai, someone wants to be a prosecutor, will go for it. I think when people do law school, criminal law, it looks like what's on TV, and we aspire to the things that are most familiar. And yes, criminal law, corporate, seems very, very interesting, and corporate law seems extremely boring. And I did my best to avoid taking any commercial or corporate papers. I ended up becoming a corporate lawyer. It's one of those things I found out was fun when I did it. But yeah. Mr. Goody Chap, that's right. I'd actually have a show that looks like a normal YouTuber if I actually did that. So yes, indeed. But yeah, it's funny. Remember to tell your son to keep an open mind about their papers that they're taking. You'd often be surprised that there's something interesting in most areas of law, except tax law. Except for that, everything is interesting. But I certainly understand the desire to be a prosecutor, and yes, Te Waiwai. I'm pretty sure he's not going to bust you. In fact, he'd have to recuse himself if that were the case. Shubas from Panama, buenos dias. Good to have the Latin American representative joining along for the last show of 2019. I'm going to keep going through. I think I mentioned last week how there was a scandal where the Kanagawa prefectural government had been found that after they had given away hard disks full of residence tax data to be wiped by a company, who in turn gave it to another company to wipe, who had an employee who took the hard drives and said that he wiped them, but instead sold them for money on Yahoo auctions, with all of the residence data still on them. And all the hand-wringing over how hard it is for local governments to really ever be truly sure that the data's been, properly wiped from the hard disks. So yeah, Yuko Obuchi, she, part of the reason maybe that Japanese women's participation in government has declined is her fault. She was a Minister of Economy, I believe. She was a kind of a flagship and touted as a potential successor as Prime Minister to Shinzo Abe, the daughter of Keizo Obuchi, the Prime Minister who died while he was in office. Tokyo University graduate, articulate, not a drooling maniac like a lot of the other people in the LDP, the women from the LDP from far right-wing parties who have joined. Actually, I thought it was quite good. However, it turned out that she was receiving a number of bribes and inappropriate direct payments, or at least her staff, where she denied knowledge of it. But when investigators came to come and investigate her, she showed the Kanagawa prefecture government how it's done. This is like 3 or 4 years ago now. But she got a drill. All of the hard disks were taken from her staff office headquarters. And exactly as Mr. Korichep said, just if you watch Silicon Valley, I was saying this before I watched them doing it on Silicon Valley, but every time you get a nail gun, get a drill. They called her the drill after this because she drilled through all of the hard disks on her work PC for no particular reason. Just felt like drilling the hard disk, not hiding evidence or anything at all. But yes, indeed. So she ended up obviously having to resign, and the Abe cabinet has had a couple of other female ministers. Actually, some of them I thought would be terrible, and turned out not to be as terrible as I thought they would be, but they were still terrible. But the best one was Yuko Obuchi, but no, she went out with basically demonstrating that she is more qualified than the Kanagawa prefectural government to handle data security, or at least when it comes to wiping sensitive data. So everyone learned from Yuko Obuchi not being corrupt and taking money, but certainly on how to protect sensitive data on hard disks by drilling holes in them. Easy thing to do. So there you go. Speaking of other government corruption, the post office the post office, in order to diversify after being privatized by Koizumi, they set up a bank, and they set up, well, actually they already had a post office bank, just like most countries have, but they set up as a private bank, and they set up an insurance arm, and they had to meet pretty aggressive revenue targets. And after struggling to sell insurance properly, they found out a way to boost their revenue, and to be more competitive in that insurance market. And that was to go and meet lots of elderly ladies and get their names and details, and then after talking to them, whether they want to buy the insurance from you or not, signing agreement contracts on their behalf and jamming them up with lots of false insurance contracts, and then charging them for it. Basically, this was done in over 12,000 cases, where salespeople, they actually developed a playbook around how to basically rip off, to literally fraudulently steal from old ladies. They targeted old ladies in particular, where when they got them to sign up for one policy, they would charge them for 8 policies, and they would make them pay. So they did that, and when the news found out about it, the actual, because the post office, before it was privatized, was part of the internal Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. They persuaded friends at the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, which is kind of a parachute where a lot of people, bureaucrats, when they want to go get cushy, sort of high-paying private sector jobs, when they retire as bureaucrats, they go into these privatized companies like the post office. So they said, hey, we need to shut up the media. So they went over to the government, and then the government said, sure, we'll shut them up. So they went to a number of bureaucrats, in addition to covering up the scandal that they had criminally and fraudulently faked a whole bunch of contracts with old ladies. Also went and put pressure on NHK to not broadcast about it. So yeah, it's been a pretty below average week for the Japan post insurance company, Kampo. And yes, there's probably going to be people go to jail about that. Unfortunately, this just keeps happening. And yes, not unlike the US situation. Well, that's a thing that happened. So I actually met a couple of weeks ago somebody from the Japan Times who was doing a look back. There's a series happening in the Japan. Oh, I've got it behind me around here somewhere actually. Was doing a look back series. So that's it. There we go. The ups and downs of J-vlogging in the 2010s. He's been doing a look back as part of a series, a decade in review, different aspects of the Japan, maybe the foreign community in particular, in Japan over the 2010s. And Patrick St. Michel decided to cover the Japan YouTube vlogging scene, and was good enough to include me and the people that he talked to. In fact, given the people that he talked to, he actually got Tokyo Kuni to offer some comments, he got Victor, he got TQ Sam, he got people like Chris Broad. I actually, it looks like I'm the only person who actually didn't give my IRL name on this, but yeah, I told him I had a policy around that, which he acknowledged in the top. I probably made it a little bit awkward for it, because I know at newspapers are supposed to give full proper names. But yeah, although it also looks like some other people, Sela, for example, decided not to. Radri decided to also shorten his name. But yes, in any case, they sort of tell the story of J-vlogging pretty much from the early days in the actual 2000s through up until now, and how it was affected by the monetization, how it was affected by the quake. And yeah, it's kind of nice what he's done. He's gone and taken a whole bunch of interviews. I didn't know how he was going to put it together. And he's kind of strung chunks of the story, of the narrative, out from all the different interviews, basically telling the same sort of flow of the story. And yeah, he actually gave my quotes quite a bit. He gave me a bit in the lead-in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He gave me a whole bunch anyway, not that I'm counting, but yeah, I'm totally counting. He gave me a lot of mentions, which I appreciated actually. And yeah. He did not quote me on one thing. He was asking me who invented, or where does the word J-vlogger come from? And I told him right away, well, there's a little bit of a debate and controversy around this, because I know there are a bunch of people claiming to have invented this. In fact, I thought myself that I had invented this at one point. But I actually remember when I saw this debate, and I remember looking back at videos in around 2008, and I found that, by coincidence, my Argonauts had mentioned it before I had, and I hadn't seen anyone else mention it. The author mentioned that Tikio Sam was adamant that he invented it. I told the reporter, and I was happy to be on the record for this, that Tikio Sam thinks he invented ice cream. I was kind of disappointed that quote did not make it into the article, but Tikio Sam definitely talking about the early days where he was actually involved in YouTube and integrated with the big YouTubers before I was. Of course, there were a lot of people that I didn't mention when I was going through this, but it was kind of cool to be it was cool to be included in that anyway, especially alongside people far more deserving of being on that list than me. But sure, I've been involved in the community in different ways through the years, so it was nice. And it was nice to include the story there. So yes, I think that's like the third time I've been mentioned in the Japan Times, and I think once or twice were like just general sort of, hey, community profiles here as a video blogger. I'm not now famous at all. In fact, I'm definitely not famous because I didn't reveal any personal information in that article. I remember the second time, a few years ago, there was actually someone was writing something on behalf of someone else who was disgruntled with a blog that I wrote, so I think I got attacked as like a right-wing, pro-Japanese, right-wing foreign defender of Japan at one point. Well, Victor and I got it as 2.5 Weijis, which was kind of fun, getting a tear-down piece done on us. So this is a lot nicer, actually. And that was kind of fun. Milchman, happy to give an autograph anytime. But yes, believe in yourself. Good to see you. By the way, believe in yourself also flagged me during the week. I'm sorry I didn't message back. I've seen, if you go onto my channel right now, there's a message that you get as you click to log on from Google saying that this is not a registered API. We were a registered API. I've got to go and sort that out, actually. I've just been too busy with work, so this is something to tidy up in the end of year. But yes, all the people coming late, great to see you all. Good to see, again, to YY, Milchman, believe in yourself and others. And I'm just zipping through the topics. I don't have a lot tonight. So, yes, I'm definitely going to be, if you do an @Markiko Simon, I'll take your topics and I'll actually go through those for the end of the night. I'm going to talk about the Space Force. I'm also going to talk about the shrinking heights of Japanese, and if you've got any others for me, let me know. I just thought this was kind of weird. Ninja is taking a shoe endorsement deal from, is this from Adidas? For gaming. It's kind of cool. I kind of get that it's kind of cool for an image thing of that these are shoes that this person likes, and if you like this person, which a lot of people do, and you want to buy shoes that they think are good taste, you would buy these shoes. One, I don't really like Adidas. I've tried Adidas and Nikes and Reeboks, and to tell you the truth, I always kept coming back to New Balance shoes. They're just really comfortable. They suit my feet better, so if I were to get my vlogging shoes, they'd probably be things that will never happen. If I was going to get them, they would be New Balance. And they would probably be made for my ass, because seriously, I don't understand how a gaming YouTuber actually needs to wear shoes at all. I mean, they might as well just make them blue fluffy slippers, if you ask me. As comfortable as possible for when you're sitting in a chair. I mean, seriously, they should make shoes for your ass and have those as sponsored for YouTubers. That's my take. But they would be snazzy and cool, just like me. I know these ninja shoes. I mean, it's cool to have a shoe that says ninja on it, but again, this is for online gaming. Unless they actually have some buttons or something on them. Again, it's not really practical with your shoes unless you're like really good at yoga. I don't understand really how that can work. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. Yes, Vice Minister of Internal Affairs quits over leak of penalties to scandal hit Japan Post. As I was saying before, the hits keep coming for the post office. Gave them a heads up. You get how much they were going to get punished. Another day in government. Another thing that came up in the news, and this probably isn't news, and I've actually heard different stories about this from different places. Japan is, when it comes to things like sexual harassment, there was a really, really big push from the Ministry of Health, Labour, Welfare to actually have all leading companies start campaigns, education campaigns, about sexual harassment and discrimination in the early 2000s, and I did see a big culture shift. It really focused on the idea of gender-biased, unfavorable ways that women generally would get treated. For example, having women go and make the tea when you have a meeting or something like that. Although, of course, it also went into the idea of it being, sexual pressure from a position of authority, specifically men against women. The law is gender-specific, and how, sexual harassment can be defined in Japan, which is something that some people, I remember at the time, took interest in. But again, this was to remedy a general power imbalance and where the problems really were. And it's complicated in Japan because, again, most Western, when I say Western, American and New Zealand, Australia, I don't know what it's like in Europe or other places, they generally try to avoid the risk of sexual harassment claims by banning office relationships. The idea being that, on the one hand, they don't want someone making an honestly intentioned attempt to have an office romance when the other person might take it as sexual harassment. They also don't want people claiming sexual harassment when relationships go wrong or badly or something happens. So, at the same time, I've always thought that the blanket ban on office relationships at a lot of US companies is kind of ridiculous. Although this is the reason why. You flip it around, where Japan is practically encouraged still in some places. There are actually company Gokon parties, which I, got invited to once at Tokyo Marine, but more because people were just interested in saying hello to me. But of course, the other side is that it offers this kind of idea that it is permitted for people to hook up with co-workers, and it's practically encouraged, and that leaves a lot of lines for abuse. Again, when you've got people who are in a position of advantage or power, for example, people wanting jobs and people hiring, there are people who take advantage of that situation, and you hear lots of stories about whether you call it sexual abuse or people basically attempting. I've not been in the situation, but I know lots of people have been in the situation who have been either told to go to a job interview, which turns out to be in a hotel room, or a job situation where during the hiring interview they're propositioned and asked to be the mistress of the boss. This happens a lot. So and by the way, Shubus, I don't know, is chess a sport? I think it kind of is, isn't it? Would you call it a sport? Well, if chess is not a sport, what is it? Maybe someone can Wikipedia that. I would think that it is. But so this is a problem in Japan. I guess it's something particularly for women to be careful of, that there are a lot of creeps, and there are unregulated and not self-aware creeps, and it still is a problem. I mean, for all of the progress that Japan has made, ironically, the idea that it's not okay to take advantage of people seeking jobs, for example, to proposition them or pressure them into having sex, is still a thing that happens. Something to be aware of. So there is that. This is more on the Japan Post thing, so I'm going to skip that. Here is the thing on heights. So Tuwawe asked this before. I guess I'll do it right now. Tuwawe, I've got this another question here, by the way, before I get into the question you just asked before, which is this one now. Is Japan, quotation marks, intending to do anything about parental abduction of kids inside Japan? Well, that's a loaded and interesting question. Parental abduction is considered to be the removal of kids, basically in violation of the rights of one of the parents. So parental abduction is kind of vague. Typically it comes up most often in the situation with divorce, where there is a binding legal custody order, where in order to get out of sharing custody or offering access to kids, one of the parents will take the kids away or deny access to the other parent. And so that would be parental abduction. The thing about Japan is that there's no family law system which recognizes a concept of mandated custody. I suppose you could argue that when people are married, it's normal to deny access, but again, this is what happens by default when people get married until there's a binding custody order. So in a weird way, the problem that Japan still doesn't really have a binding family law system at all, and in spite of all of the challenges and the fact that it signed up to the Hague Convention, but yet it doesn't have a means of enforcing the judgments. So Japan has a situation that when you get divorced, in almost all cases, unless the people basically agree on access to kids, while it will have a system of alimony where most of the time it will be the divorced husband will be required to make payments to the wife to support the wife and the family. The idea that the husband will have access to the kids is pretty much they're told to give up right away, and it's often the family and in-laws of one of the sides, and sometimes it'll be the grandparents that will actually look after the kid, and from that the husband will take access. But it's normally considered that the non-custodial parent will not have custody, and in Japan that's not abduction, that's culture, unfortunately. There are more and more fathers bringing lawsuits for custody. There was a lawsuit last month from another number of Japanese fathers and one foreign father in that group who were claiming that the absence of a legal system means to enforce joint custody or to enforce access rights for divorced fathers was a violation of their constitutional rights. The Supreme Court of Japan found that the absence of such a system, and this was the idea, was to get a court ruling to put pressure on the government to actually hurry up and create a family law system in Japan that works with enforcement mechanisms. The Supreme Court said no, it's not a violation of the Constitution to not have such a system. So the idea is basically until the government shows any interest in actually creating a system where divorced parents have access to the kids when they're not the custodial parent, the situation in Japan is that parental abduction, as you call it, Tawaiwa, is actually the policy of the government here in Japan until the law changes. And while there are now voices calling for the change, I think it still is generally accepted here that when you divorce, you not just divorce. It's like breaking up with someone, except you're also breaking up not just with your spouse but with your kids, which is pretty depressing and scary if you think about it. But there you go. Strategies for getting the law changed. To why you're asking? Well, the strategy of lawyers going through and trying to get a court ruling to pressure the government to do is certainly one way. The other thing I would say, the smarter access, if I had the ability and the interest in lobbying about this, I believe that there are, for example, the Koizumis are kind of famous. They were actually raised divorced, but they were the son was raised by his father. But this was where, again, I think the parents didn't have access. I suppose you could lobby LDP members who have divorced parents or kids, or basically people, sympathetic voices. The problem is, of course, that the government, the LDP, is dominated by mostly elderly, almost 80 years or above, and people who are generally very socially conservative. But I would say the best means is to find someone in government to be who's actually in the LDP, who's actually in the government, to be a sponsor of the change. But yeah, Mr. Korichep, lobbyist makes you very angry. Well, you love Japan because there are no real lobbyists here like there are in America. There are industry groups. There are big sort of talking shops which work with the bureaucrats. I mean, half the time the politicians aren't even involved in making law here in Japan. Yeah, Koizumi divorced his wife and raised his kids himself. I think the mother was actually I can't remember exactly what the problems were, but yeah, she did not have access to the kids. So that was a thing. Koizumi paid his wife off to get custody. Well, that's right. I was trying to remember the story, and I can remember some bad things being said about the wife, which I didn't want to repeat because I didn't remember the story clearly enough. But again, I mean, that's a classic case. Japan is a single parent, custody system. It is changing. It should change, but essentially, you need enough interested people to make it change. And it's I don't know. Outside of it, given that the Supreme Court of Japan has basically shut down the judicial court, the only way is really through legislation. I suppose the two avenues are lobbying the Ministry of Health, Labour, Welfare, which oversees the family courts, to actually lobby them to try to get a budget from the Ministry of Finance to actually try to build out the family law system. But fundamentally, it would really be lobbying for a law, which would come from the ministry. So maybe it would be through that avenue. Perhaps talking with family lawyers. It's not easy for regular people to get the law changed in Japan. So yeah, that's about the best I can come up with. Speaking of health, labour and welfare, this graph is something which I just read this evening, which is interesting. The lines there, this doesn't show up very clearly, so I'm going to see if I can access this page. It's a graph showing that young people now, average heights. So the blue line are people 18 to 19 years old. The other lines below that are basically 20 to 29, 30 to 39. The red line down the bottom is people 50 to 59. And this is average height. So, average height in terms of 175, 171 centimeters, or is that 172? So what's happened just in the last couple of years is that there has been a crash in the average height of 18 to 19-year-olds at the same time as post-war 50 to 59-year-olds have been gradually increasing, and it's actually come to the point now where 50 to 59-year-olds are now on average taller than 18 to 19-year-olds. Now the normal assumption is that post-war, like during the war and up to and through, there was malnutrition, there was not access to dairy products, there was not access to a lot of meat. So people were shorter, and in the post-war economic miracle, people all started drinking, milk was put out in school lunches, and people started eating more nutritiously and living healthier lifestyles. And you could see this from the line down the bottom, how people aged 50 and above were gradually getting taller and taller and taller. And so the pattern should have continued. And this is what I saw when I was playing rugby. When I saw, when I was playing university teams and stuff like that, they were on average, taller than me. They weren't necessarily up to international rugby player standards, but the average heights were pretty much, they were, you get kids in high schools nowadays, as tall as kids in New Zealand high schools. But there's been a drop apparently in the last few years, and some people trying to put some research into this. The assumptions were decreasing exercise, decreasing healthiness of food, and decreasing sleep being the contributors. This is what researchers assume by default, but apparently what researchers found when they looked into the reason for this, lack of butter. Okay, you're making my brain explode now. That is, you're right. You're absolutely right. That's right. Lack of butter. This corresponds to the shortages in butter. You can look at this. You can actually probably trace this. I would. This is absolutely correct. This is again the failure of the dairy production system in Japan. That's what I would argue, actually. So, okay, the theory that these mistaken researchers who don't realize that this is due to the totalitarian, communist Bolshevik system of dairy production in Japan, that you just made my brain explode. Thank you, everybody. Is that apparently in Japan, as I discovered myself with my own son, doctors here put a lot of pressures on women. Again, another reason why it's not a great place to be a woman. They put a lot of pressure on women when they're pregnant to try to minimize the size of the child in order to reduce complications during birth. Japan has almost no C-sections, almost no mutsubunben, no epidurals. They do natural, and Japan has actually quite a high rate of complication and death in childbirth. It's kind of scary. Very few hospitals even have epidurals, even if one becomes necessary. So they do it old-fashioned, and they try to increase the safety for the mum by basically starving her, by denying her the ability to eat in order to stop the child growing in the womb. The philosophy is keep the child small in the womb and then build them up and feed them after they're born. However, this really apparently took hold. Like really the rates of adoption of this among doctors really started to increase around 18 to 19 years ago, and there's a theory that this is to do with an uptake and push of this policy to force the reduction in the size of babies in the womb is now corresponding to this crash in heights of people post-birth. That's an interesting theory, although not as good as the butter theory. Maybe it's like this 1-2 combination of both. Tuaiwa, is that correct, that there's higher rates of C-section than New Zealand and Australia? Well, maybe it's the epidural rates that's different. I think that's it. And I think I overstepped there. We had a C-section here, but we went to a hospital that could specifically offer epidural. There are only like 3 hospitals in Tokyo that offer epidurals, and we went to one that had them. But hundreds of hospitals in Tokyo, they don't even stock epidurals. Kind of disturbing from that perspective anyway. Yes, thank you for the correction to Iwo. But yes, indeed, so that was a thing. And to me, it's a weird practice. I mean, again, it is true that there's a tendency for women, it's dangerous to let your weight go too out of control, and some people don't recover very well from the extra weight that they put on while they're pregnant, but that's for the kid. Eating for 2, and to me that's a good and natural thing. And I thought it was kind of weird that doctors are trying to starve pregnant women in Japan. Like, how is that a good thing? And of course the study also points out that people who are born shorter people typically have other health problems later in life with blood pressure and so on. So apparently this is recognized as a public health risk, and it's an interesting statistic that came out. Ikinari steak, you'll see this chain everywhere that's exploded all of a sudden on the scene a few years ago. Ikinari steak, it's basically it's a chain of steak restaurants that suddenly was TV commercials. I've never actually been. There's one right by where I work, there's one right by my gym. I've just never quite felt. Japanese steak typically is cooked on a hot plate, like a heated plate, and it's very steamy and it makes you all sort of stinky a little bit. But yeah, apparently it's quite a good steak chain. People talk about it being good and quite affordable, and they immediately started putting dozens of restaurants up all over Japan. And then a few weeks ago, apparently if you went into one of these restaurants, there was a message posted on the wall of all of these restaurants from the company president saying, we need you to come to this restaurant more often, because otherwise we might just go out of business, so please come. It sounded like somebody saying, if you don't subscribe to my channel, I'm going to give it all up. That's kind of how it looked, but they put this message up. And by the way, Ikinari steak, the term, the name of the restaurant, Ikinari steak. Ikinari means all of a sudden. So it's like, straight away. So straight away steak, all of a sudden, suddenly steak. I like suddenly steak, that's how I translated it on Twitter. So this is called suddenly steak. Well, apparently suddenly steak today announced that they were suddenly shutting down 44 of their 65 restaurants, and they may be about to suddenly go out of business. So yes, that is hey Miyahiro, good to see you, Miyahiro. Welcome. So ikinari tosan poi ikinari heiten. They're having problems. I must admit, I'm kind of tempted to go check it out a little bit, not so much out of sympathy, just sort of curiosity as to what's going on. I do hear that they're actually quite good. It is apparently quite affordable, and if you want some protein, it's a pretty good choice. But yeah, suddenly steak is suddenly now in trouble. So that was the thing that happened. This was another interesting story. I think this is the last one that I have on my regular topics, so I can talk about Space Force and other topics like that after this, and please give them to me at Maki Hiko-san. I'll talk about whatever you want. Snubbed by foreigners, Japan revamps blue collar work visa program. So recapping. A year ago, the Japanese government announced that in order to cope with the worker shortage issue in many industries in Japan, including things like food production, many sectors of the economy, they set up a new category of blue-collar worker. Right now you have to be a university academic or a particularly sort of highly skilled worker of some sort. And by the way, English teacher is considered a technical or highly skilled job, so that's why it is relatively easy to get an English teaching visa. But to get a job working in a factory or a job working in a food preparation plant, although they do have that horrible slave labor apprenticeship visa system, they don't have a lot of visas. It's pretty difficult for people. For example, if you're from Laos and you want to get a job in Japan, it's pretty difficult. So the government thought, well, we're going to open the floodgates to 340,000 people to come and fill the worker shortages all over Japan over 5 years between 2019 and 2024. With the goal of getting 40,000 people in the first year during 2019, this year, and to expand that over time to basically fill up all the sectors of the economy that need all these extra workers. The system that they open up would open opportunities for people from countries that typically haven't had opportunities to come and work in Japan. However, they would be limited in the time that they can stay in Japan to 5 years. They will not be entitled to bring family members with them, and the visas are not renewable or extendable. To Waiwai, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, have a good night. But yes, so this visa system was basically, it was a pretty good idea, but when they announced, okay everybody, now we know you've always been wanting to come to Japan, we've prepared the way for this visa. Apparently the total number of people that came in the first year, the target was 40,000 people. 1,000 people came under this visa. It was a combination of problems. The visa requires Japanese language ability, like certification on a test, yet the test was not actually ready in time for the visas to become available. People just didn't know about the visa system. The tests that were required for the visa were not made available in countries, so people, even if they wanted to come in, they didn't know about the visa system, often couldn't take the test. To become eligible, people didn't like the conditions of it, and the whole bureaucratic system for setting up around the visa was completely failed, and there was just general lack of awareness. So it's a pretty resounding failure in the first year, and the government cabinet secretary has said that he's going to go back and look at all the lessons on what went wrong and look to improve them. And so while, again, you might scoff, and I scoffed myself when I heard that they were planning to suddenly bring in 340,000 blue-collar workers into Japan, and so far it has gone badly, don't underestimate the ability of the Japanese government, for all the time I can sit here and criticize it, to learn lessons from its mistakes and to improve. Again, the example I always keep coming back to is the tourism thing. When Koizumi, Japan was having like 20,000 or 30,000 foreign tourists a year, or some ridiculously low number, he had a goal of getting 13 million tourists in Japan by 2013, within 10 years of increasing the number of tourists. Well, it was like 10 times at the time. In fact, it was probably like 100 times at the time. It was ridiculous. And given how, Japan used to be so terribly badly set up for non-Japanese domestic tourism, it was kind of ridiculous, the idea that Japan was going to turn itself into a worldwide tourism powerhouse like it's supposed to be. It sounded like the LDP, assuming that everyone would want to come to Japan because Japan's awesome. And it turned out to be a bigger success than, they've got 40 million tourists a year coming at the moment. It's actually exceeded the goals. They've set new goals ahead of this now. So, they've figured out the tourism thing, and if they could figure out the tourism thing, I think they can figure out the working visa thing. And the other great thing about Japan when it comes to policies like immigration is that for what a lot of people, anti-immigration people, believe and say about Japan, the idea that it's it's an isolated example of a country that's doing it right, choosing to remain homogenous and not mixing races and whatnot. It's absolutely not true. And the reason that the difference with Japan is that immigration policy is managed by bureaucrats, not by politicians. It's not used as a subject of the public debate. Bureaucrats are trusted to get on and manage the immigration policy as they see as appropriate, and so far it's not been politicized. And in that absence of politicization, the percentage of foreigners, or the number of foreigners in Japan, has like quadrupled in the time I've been here. We've gone from being like less than 0.5% to being like 2% of the population, nearly 3%, and going up a lot. So it's something that I think, in spite of the bumps in the beginning, it's kind of a good thing actually that they've had so many problems, because it's going to force them to look at how they can improve. And I think it's going to result in more opportunities and better opportunities to come and work in Japan than this current system offers. I do hope that they get rid of that apprenticeship visa system as well, which is a disaster, and it's actually bad for Japan's image. That is all the topics I have. I can of course do music. I'm going to talk about Space Force. If you've got other topics for me to talk about, hey, John Anderson, good to see you. Happy to do that. Merry Christmas indeed, John Anderson, good to see you. I'm going to talk about Space Force, and anything else you've got at Mark Simon in the comments, and I will see it highlighted in orange on the side menu for me. But yeah, so Space Force. So that is the thing that got announced. I don't really know exactly. It looks to me like, from the information that I saw associated with it, that it's going to be, the main thrust of it is going to be control of satellites in war. I mean, obviously they're going to be talking about things like, actual hostile satellites with lasers and stuff that can knock out or damage other satellites. But primarily it's going to be about telecommunication satellites on the battlefield and managing so not quite as sexy. It's not going to be quite the Expanse or anything like that right away. Also, it's a little bit confusing given that the Air Force, I know, has had like a covert, like a space program for a while. They've been flying secret shuttle missions. They've had their own, I think, was it the X-33 or that cool sort of flying body plane that was in orbit for like nearly 2 years recently on a covert mission. So, I mean, America's had a militarized space force for a long time. There again, as is understood, that the main purpose of that mission of military in space until now really has been about launching and maintaining spy satellites, and not so much carrying out warfare in space or from space. And it was always understood as one of those things that, any country, it was something that was recognized back in the 60s. The reason that nobody wanted to end up with space militaries was because, anyone, right now, China could put up a floating platform, and it wouldn't have to be for a sophisticated space station. It could just be a platform in space with 10 warheads. They wouldn't even need proper missiles on them, and they could put it in geosynchronous orbit over America. And if those had supersonic missiles attached to them, and you only had to fire them down like 100 kilometers, you could hit anywhere in the world with a nuclear weapon at supersonic speed in like a couple of minutes. You wouldn't have any time to detect or stop it. So this was the big fear during the Star Wars race, apart from the fact it was bankrupting the Soviet Union. Spending on all of these things is the fact that it was more or less putting a literal sort of Damocles over the Earth, the idea that we were going to have the possibility of weaponized space platforms. And while it's true that America now enjoys a kind of an advantage, at least economically, over its rivals, the world hasn't really evened up in terms of America's technological and financial position, in terms of the Cold War and everything. I mean, Russia's gone down, but they can still launch rockets, and so can China, so can Israel, so can North Korea, so can Japan, so can France, so can England. A lot of countries can launch their own satellites and can launch a lot of things into space. In fact, now we have private companies with the ability to launch pretty big payloads into space. So yeah, the idea, on the one hand, as a kid who grew up with Star Wars, it seems kind of cool, the idea that you could have space fighter pilots, and it's kind of exciting. I also do like the idea that if it does drive spending on things like moon bases and Mars bases and stuff like that, that is good. But again, I don't totally get it. The other reason that, by the way, is China is cut off from participating in international and US joint space, for example, moon missions and Mars missions and whatnot, is because the Chinese space program is part of the Chinese military. And although the Chinese military is not using space directly for the purpose of, for example, putting platforms of nuclear missiles over America, the idea is that they could do that. All of the astronauts that go out for China are Chinese military. All the satellites are created within the PLA and launched. So this is something as well. I think once you make that open and you turn it into a competition, you really raise the stakes of a lot of conflicts. So yeah, on the one hand, it's kind of like as a kid, the idea of having lots of jobs in space, the idea that you'd have plumbers and soldiers and police and scientists and whatnot all in space, it's kind of cool from that perspective. But when you think about what it could really mean, I don't think it would be I'm a little bit worried about whether it's a good thing or not. Believe in yourself. How about being able to do gene splicing with a CRISPR kit from Amazon? I assume you're not addressing that to me, because I can't really say anything about that, but yes. So yeah, that's what I think about the Trump space platform. It looks like some people saying play music, and this is the final show of the year. We're coming up on time, so I'm going to do that. Final track, I'm going to just play it here on the screen. Well, let's see, it might connect. Let's hook the rig up, see what happens. Let's flip over here. Who knows? Might get lucky. Oh, there it is. I don't know why the screen has been so dim lately. Something's going on with the settings here that I will find out and fix, but that is working. Oh, it's a little bit dodgy, but it's working. So okay, give me a genre. Final voyage of the year. Give me an inspiration. What would you like to hear? Oh, that fixed it. I just figured it out. Okay. Oh, that's great. That's a lot better. Let's do a new one. What do you want? Drum and bass, hip hop, or house? Give me a drum and bass. Sergeant Booker, you're reading my mind. You're ahead of me. Okay, let's make it 174. Okay, let's make it 174, and let's pick a nice drum and bass beat. Let me check that there's sound coming through. There we go. into some. That's the show, and that's the year. That was kind of fun. I might play around with that some more. I'm going to save that track. Thank you for joining. Have a good end of year. Happy Hanukkah, happy Kwanzaa, happy Christmas, happy whatever you're having. Have a good one. I'm going to enjoy being in Australia. I'm going to be back in 2020, probably second week of January. Have a good one with you and yours. Remember to check out on Twitter. I'll still be active on Twitter. You can talk with me anytime there. And I am looking forward to seeing what happens in the new year. I'll probably do a bit of a retrospective after in the new year and what's happened in 2019. Very good Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and yours, and see you again soon. Have a good one. See you. Peace. Boom. Thank you for joining. Remember to like if you liked.